Good afternoon. This week we will talk with James Skinner, professor from London, and we will talk about science, about research methods in sport and how they're used in our modern sport. And my first question will be how research methods used in sport and what is difference of sport management researchers from other different spheres. What specific characteristics you can share with us?
Well, I think to begin, I think the most important thing is to recognise the importance of research, and the importance of research to the development of the discipline of sport, and specifically sport business. The business of sport itself is unique because of the context in which the business happens. So there's a lot of attachment, a lot of emotion, social, cultural attachment to sport as a business. So these particular nuances around the business of sport means that sometimes we have to adapt our methodologies to take these things into account. As sport becomes more and more globalised and more scientific, we tend to see the application of different research methodologies to try and understand how to improve performance, make sport more accessible, make sport organisations more connected with their communities, and also make them more effective and more efficient. So in recent times, for example, we are seeing the growth of the analytics stream in sport. So how can we analyse performance and use data that we take from performance to increase performance of athletes in order to increase the probability of winning and make them more competitive. We also see the application in analytics, for example, to business practice. So in marketing, we can use analytics to understand who is engaging with our social media sites, what they're engaging with, what sites seem to be the most popular. And if we get behind the surface level of social media to analyse that data, we can start to begin to understand our customers and and we can use that data to connect with them and build relationships with them. So that type of quantitative analysis is very helpful to us. Qualitatively, we need to understand, if we're going to use qualitative research, for example, we can use that in community settings to find out how people engage with sport organisations, and as a consequence of that engagement, what are their expectations of it? How do they engage with it? How do they see sport organisations contributing to communities? What could sport organisations do better? So there's lots of different methods that we can use to improve our managerial practice around the place of sport organisations in communities.
And what do you think about technologies? So you said a lot about research, and now it looks like some kind of sports, they're not more competition between athletes, but it's more competition between researchers. It could be doping, it could be equipment, and the more developed countries, they could show better results. So what do you think about that?
I think, as in any industry, sports are competitive, and competition creates innovation, and innovation is used to create success on the sporting arena or on the athletic track. Some wealthier countries obviously have better access to funding, they have better sports science, and as a consequence of that, they can invest more in the development of technologies or new ways to improve athletic performance. So in that sense, it does provide a competitive advantage. I'd caution about comparing investment in technology and innovation with doping. I think they're two separate practices that need to be considered individually. So we need to ask ourselves, for example, what are our views on doping? And just because technology may provide a competitive advantage doesn't mean we should allow athletes to dope. We need to think about doping as a practice on its own to determine how we feel about that and if it should be accepted practice or if we need to detect and deter athletes from engaging in that. In the technology realm, how do you equalise improvements in technology is a difficult one to address. But I think as the world gets more connected, as ideas travel quickly in this age of technology, I think countries catch up on innovative practices and apply them. It's just being ahead of the curve that is a challenge. And I don't think you can really take that away from an industry, because the nature of any industry is to be the leader in its field, and sport is no different. And countries want to win gold medals, they want to win World Cups, they want their athletes to win. So they're going to engage in innovative practices to provide that competitive edge. Countries just have to find ways of facilitating that process or allowing that or funding that so that it can occur. And perhaps there's funds or grants that can be made available to countries that aren't as wealthy to assist them in this practice.
And how young researcher could start work as professional researcher? Is it possible that, for example, any sport federations, international or national, or any sport clubs, they're looking for young researchers, and this young researcher who want to work in that, that he or she could apply for that, or there are any other ways how to go inside?
Well, I'd start by saying one of the things I think is important for any postgraduate student to have is an understanding of research. And I think the program here at the Russian International Olympic University provides that. So it's really important that you have a grounding in research. If you want to be a researcher more specifically, then you have to continue to develop and enhance your research skill set. So that means that you're probably going to have to do more research training beyond what you currently do in your master's program, if you want to focus on specifically being a researcher as your career. And normally that means either a pathway into a PhD, which is a research training degree, and will take you to another level, or looking at other options where you can develop those skills. I think all organisations value research, and there's definite benefits from organisations engaging in research practice. Some are more likely to invest in it more heavily than others, simply because they have the funds, the budget, the finances to be able to do that, and also because it's core to them maintaining or creating competitive advantage. So if we think of big companies like Nike, Under Armour, Adidas, Reebok, technology companies, for example, key to their success is to be innovative and think of new ways, new products, new services that they can offer to their customers. And this is a lot of those ideas stem from their research and development departments. So they are looking more likely for good researchers. But national governing bodies, for example, and community sport organisations, they still need to engage in research, even though their budget might be as large as these multinational organisations, because they still need to understand they still need to understand who their customers are, how they can best service them, how they can create opportunities for community members or for their members, how the sport can contribute to the community as a whole. Is one example. National governing bodies, for example, need to know about their members, what their members think of them, how can they create better services around their sport, how can they promote their sport better, what do they need to do in order for their sport to remain relevant and to have high participation numbers, what are the trends occurring in their sport. All these questions can be answered through research. So I think over time, as the sports space continues to become more competitive, research and understanding those things that I spoke about becomes more central to to the long-term viability of all sport organisations.
Thank you. And last question. You taught during this week about different perspective of research and how it be useful for sport organizations, for sports community. And I want to ask you, could you give an example how research in sport management changed the situation in any kind of sport or in any club drastically? And it could be long-term research, as you said. It's in our 1 year, it's impossible to make really perfect research with good results. But I'm sure you have such.
The key to research, I think, is to be proactive and not reactive. And in many cases, a lot of the changes that have happened in sport are reactions to problems that sports have noticed. So moving forward, I think sport organisations are now aware that they need to be continually thinking about their customers, their market, who they're competing against, their long-term viability, and they're developing strategies to do that. If we look back in history, though, a lot of what has happened or changed is a consequence of reaction. So if we look at particular sports that have found it difficult and they've noticed that their participation numbers are falling off or their television viewing numbers are getting smaller, which means their broadcast rights are being reduced. They've looked at that and thought about their product and said, well, what do we need to do to our product? How can we connect better with our market, with our new market perhaps? How can we bring new customers into our sport or new participants into our sport? So we've seen sports have changed their format. For example, in cricket, we've seen a shift away from traditional test match cricket to one-day cricket, and that product became a little bit stale, and then we saw the emergence of 2020 cricket. Haven't been able to leverage their broadcast revenues because it's not necessarily conducive to good television. So sports have repackaged themselves to make themselves a better product for television. Triathlon is one example of that. So we can't, and that's all a consequence of research, looking at what's going on, analysing trends, looking where new returns or new revenues can be generated from. And as a consequence of that, new products or variations on the core product have emerged. And we now think of those as just being part of the overall product. So in that sense, sport has in many ways reinvented itself, and through research has come up with new products that it can sell to the marketplace.
Thank you for interview, and thank you for watching. I hope next week we will have more interesting facts and you will be smarter. Thank you.